Hey there, everybody. Fox 35, Storm Team Meteorologist Noah Bergman here. Thanks for clicking on our tropical update online and our website, fox35orlando.com, on our news and weather apps, our digital streaming platform, Fox Local, and also our YouTube channel. Thank you to our YouTube audience for checking in with us. Hope you've had a great August as we are now about to head into Labor Day weekend. All right, let's talk some tropics. Let's show you the maps right now. And this map is not from right now. It's actually from 19 years ago. Hurricane Katrina was making landfall. It was the morning of August 29th, 19 years ago. This was the infrared satellite, the 28th into the 29th. There you see Florida on the right, and in the left center of the screen, what was a just prolific hurricane with an absolute buzzsaw on the satellite, very crystal clear eye, incredibly well defined and circular. This thing did weaken upon landfall in Louisiana, but it was still a strong hurricane. This was the view inside from the hurricane hunters, and this is what we call the stadium effect, where inside the eye, think about it like standing in the middle of a football stadium, but the really big ones. Obviously I'm biased, like like Michigan, Beaver Stadium. Obviously I'm a Penn Stater, so I'm going to reference that, but think of a really big football stadium, like where they host the Super Bowl, cascades out like that to the side. That is what you get in the really high-end hurricanes, where it doesn't go straight up from the eye. The clouds go out and up like that, and it kind of looks like a stadium when you're inside, and completely crystal clear and calm and sunny in the eye. That was inside from the hurricane hunters, and this is the static image of the infrared satellite. There is Florida, and from this point to landfall, it did weaken a little bit. Here is the path historically. Did impact South Florida as a Category 1 hurricane. Then it curled into the Gulf of Mexico, strengthened to a Category 5, and this became the 6th deadliest hurricane in United States history. Galveston from the earlier 1900s ranks number 1. All right, so all storms this year so far. Let me get you caught up now with where we are. We've had A through E. 2 storms have made landfall in the U.S., Beryl and Debbie. Now, I know some of you might be saying and asking or wondering, what happened? And what do I mean? If you don't know what I'm talking about, what happened to the storms the last 2 weeks? We kind of just pulled the plug on nothing. To be honest, that was unexpected. The last 2 weeks, I think it's fair to say the majority of the meteorological community did not expect there to be this lull. There hasn't been anything after Ernesto, but that's going to change. Now, a couple of things about that. Even in extremely active years, there can be lulls, and often there are lulls in the activity. Now, I'm saying all of this because I've been asked by many people, does this lack of activity the last 2 weeks mean the calls and predictions made previously for a hyperactive year, extreme season, this, that, and the other, does that mean that that's now called off? I don't think so. There might be some disagreement on that in the meteorological community, but I think I'd say it's probably split. NOAA just confirmed their forecast for an extremely active season. Colorado State has maintained their numbers. I think we'll still end up as extremely active, just solely based on the developing La Nina and the extremely hot water temperatures, but we'll see as we enter September. So this quiet spell, I think, is going to have interesting consequences, and here's why. Because the water is so hot and we've had a lack of activity to cool it right now, that means that the water temperatures will be plenty supportive for hurricanes. Late into the year, it could mean a very backloaded season where the storms are more focused on the end of the season this year rather than the early and middle part, and also could sustain tropical activity into November this year. All right, so here's what we're tracking out there for you. It's this wave right here in red on the clouds and then circled in orange. It's got a medium chance of development, 40% as of now. Here's what I think you should know. It bears close watching. To be honest, and I try to shoot you straight, I'm not sure yet if this is actually going to develop, but underlined, if it does, it could really take off late next week as it gets closer to the Gulf and the Western Caribbean. So we've had A through E. This would be named Francine if it does develop. Then after that would be Gordon. So the reason why, and there's a couple of reasons, and to be honest, it's not just one. And even still, I've tried to talk to some other colleagues and some friends and learn and read from people who are far more into this, with PhDs and research, tropically speaking, than I am. But there's a couple of working theories why things just kind of got abruptly quiet after Ernesto. There's not really one reason to just point at. A couple of things. One, the dust plume has been unexpectedly large and long sustaining. You see that in brown. That's number one. Number two, the tropical waves that have come off the coast of Africa have come off the coast too far north. And what that has done is they've come into this dust plume and they've been killed off, and they haven't been able to survive to the central and then eventually western Atlantic and develop. Number two, the ocean temps there are cooler because all that dust limits the sun and the water has cooled in this part, and that can't sustain thunderstorms. Number three, and this is kind of a one where there's some disagreement in the meteorological community and some scientific disagreement in a fair sense. Now, I don't have a graphic for it because this is a pretty new thing, but it's called an Atlantic Nina. What it is, remember El Nino, La Nina, that's in the Pacific, water temps warmer, cooler, warmer El Nino, cooler El Nino. In the Atlantic, this is a relatively new thing that's only been discovered and researched the last few years. Off of Africa, on the southern coast, there's a little pocket down here of cooler water that mysteriously has developed. That there is some ongoing research that suggests when that is there, it could weaken these tropical waves as they come off the coast. So those are a handful. They all don't, you can't just point to one of them and say that's the reason, but all of those have had some impact the last few weeks. All of that aside, this wave here we'll keep an eye on too, but it's this one right here that's kind of already out ahead of that dust plume we'll keep close tabs with. There it is on the water vapor imagery, you notice that right there, but look at all the brown, it's nowhere near. There's not really a lot of dry air next to it, so it is, in that sense, in a favorable window, but it's the wind shear and some other things that are pretty hostile right now. So in terms of the timing over the next week, week and a half, by Monday, Labor Day should be at that first dashed line. By Friday, September 6th, somewhere along this red dashed line, somewhere in the central Bahamas, northwest Cuba, or the far western Caribbean. So to answer your question, if you're asking and wondering it, when would this impact Florida, the Gulf Coast, the Southeast? If it did become Hurricane Francine, it would be after next Friday. So we're talking about Saturday, September 7th, Sunday the 8th, Monday the 9th. So 7, 8, 9 is when it would be in here. Right here, Friday the 6th, and then right here, Labor Day. So in terms of the long-term future, here it is summarized for you. Hostile conditions in the green, mainly because of wind shear in a center hasn't really consolidated yet. Once it gets past the islands, conditions should become more favorable. The wind shear will relax. Now, the ocean temps are historically hot here, so that's not the issue. It's the wind shear, and does it actually have a center at that point? But overall, the conditions should become more favorable in the yellow. And then if it makes it into that orange, conditions will become extremely ripe. Now here's my concern, not just for this potential system, but for the rest of the season. We already saw this with Beryl earlier in July. It got to Cat 5 strength, set a bazillion new records for how early and intense it got. But the water here is hotter now than it was then, and you saw what it produced in Beryl way earlier in the season. Notice here our system plots extreme in terms of the amount of ocean heat content for tropical systems. This is what's called the loop current right here, where the water in the Caribbean comes up, it does a loop, and then becomes the Gulf Stream and goes out over here. But you can see the majority of the Caribbean is bordering on extreme level of ocean heat content. Right here in the southeastern Gulf, extreme, very hot to extreme off of Florida's east coast. So the point is, if a storm were to come like this, like a Jean or an Andrew or like an Ian or a Charlie across Cuba, then like this, it's going to have top of the chart level fuel to become a strong hurricane for the rest of the season, assuming ideal conditions. So that's the real concern, is that if we get stuff the rest of the season, it's going to have plenty of fuel in the ocean to work with, although remember, that's not the only piece of the recipe. So in terms of big picture, long term, there's two waves. Again, remember I showed you, but right now it's the first one that has a chance of development. Here's the European model, what we call the ensemble, so 50 different versions of the Euro. It says about a 50% chance by the 5th of September, so this is the middle of next week, that we'll have a tropical system named Francine here, south or near Puerto Rico. And then behind it, about a 50% chance of another one that would be Gordon, if that one did in fact develop. So let's talk some models now. Here's the European model. Now this is the wind and the wind barbs on here at about 10,000 feet. Just it makes it clearer for you to see everything else that's going on. So it's September 2nd, you see it crossing the island, still just kind of a tropical wave, maybe a depression. Then it starts to get its act together. Now remember your anatomy of tropical systems, if you will, in this area. Land interaction with the islands is crucial, especially as they're in their early stages of development. If this thing was already a Cat 5 out here, yes, it still matters, but it matters tremendously less. Say if there was a Cat 5 hurricane right here going this way, yeah, the islands are going to impact it, but it's a lot less impactful than when something's trying to get going and is contending with the island. So obviously a track right over Cuba, Hispaniola, a lot more impactful and detrimental to Genesis. Something that stayed north or south of the islands, even by a narrow margin, means a lot higher ceiling. So that's something we'll watch too. But notice the Euro winds this up, tropical storm, hurricane, by the middle and end of next week. Here's the GFS model. Now, candidly, the GFS model has bounced back and forth each run. Each run, the last day or two, it said a storm will form, then nothing. A storm will form or nothing. So it just goes to show you how volatile and teetering on the edge of development this system is. In my opinion, it either will develop and become a hurricane or won't do anything. I don't really see any middle ground of, oh, it might just be a weak little sloppy depression or a storm and kind of go on along its merry little way now. It'll either completely do nothing at all, or I think it'll become a hurricane. That's kind of just how I see it as of right now. But here's the GFS model. Interestingly, pretty good agreement with the Euro that this does become a named storm there by the middle of next week. And then it becomes a game of where does it go. But there's a high out over here, so it's not going to probably recurve like this. It would either come off of Florida's east coast to Florida into the Gulf. So it bears close watching if that in fact does occur. I wouldn't be too worried about it right now, but again, the bottom line is we should watch it close, because if it is able to generate a center and form, conditions do become quite favorable next week. A reminder, we are nearing the peak of hurricane season, which is about September 10th. But notice this chart, if you drew a line right here, on the right side of that line, there's a lot more activity after the peak than there is before. Obviously, that's because it coincides with the warmest water temperatures and the lightest wind shear most years in the Atlantic basin. We'll be here to get you through the rest of hurricane season. I would suspect that after this unexpected lull, things are going to get quite active, and at some point we'll have something else come near Florida this season. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you've got your little stockpile, a plan in place. You don't have to, get all worked up. Just a plan in place to know, run through with your family, your business, what you would do if there was a hurricane or something threatening us in Florida. But certainly, we're heading to that peak part of the season, and we need to keep tabs with this potential Francine as we head into next week. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you on Fox 35 with more over the next few days.